the self is changing. So if you're saying being true to yourself, which self is it that you're being true to? The one of right today, the person you're trying to grow into? So for me, it's okay to edit. It's necessary to edit, but the whole range you're editing from has to be authentic, and a commitment to widening that range of experience and talents and knowledge is essential.
Hi, I am Sophie Vaux, and this is the Rise and Play podcast. In the show, I sit down with influential thought leaders of the gaming industry to deconstruct how they create the best team and company cultures in order to create the best games. Every episode brings actionable insight to improve your leadership, self-awareness, and emotional management skills. Because becoming a better leader starts with becoming a better human. So, are you ready to unlock your full potential in life and business? Let's begin. Don't just see the future, know the future with today's sponsor, Solsten. They make it easy to identify how your audiences and players actually play and what keeps them coming back for more. In a previous life, I used Solsten Product Navigator for a game in soft launch and discovered that my audience was more complex than I thought. Instead of one homogeneous group, I was able to identify two unique personas, take a series of calculated risks in our game design, and strike a balance between the two groups. Our approach shifted from making a game for everyone to creating a personal experience for most valuable players. And we were able to put our resources and time to good use and launch our game with a high level of confidence in its success. Visit go.solsten.io/riseandplay, that's SOLSTEN, for a demo and receive 30% off your first Solsten engagement crafted to your studio's needs. Learn why EA, Supercell, Wooga, and more use Solsten to create the best human-centric gaming experiences possible. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Rise and Play, and today I have the pleasure to have Steve Cuss with me. The topic today will be talking about a specific topic, which is liberated leadership. And I have no idea of what it is. That's why we're going to be talking about it today. So Steve, and I'm so happy to have connected with Steve, has an extensive background in the video game industry. He started his journey actually in 1994 as a programmer at Intelligent Games, and then later quickly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the development director, co-owner, after a successful management buyout. And so among the company that Steve has joined, in 2001, Steve joined Electronic Arts, where he initially focused the Harry Potter franchise, also transitioned later to Criterion in 2003, worked on many franchises that we'll have a chance to talk about today, and later also was appointed head of studio operation in 2018. So many different roles, really hands-on in development of games, but also leadership roles. And the most interesting part for me is, of course, today, the present and why we're connecting today. So Steve embarked on a new chapter by founding the Game Plan Consultancy, and driven by his passion for liberated leadership. Steve has authored a book titled Liberated Leaderships and Lesson Learned from 20 years producing video games at EA. So that's what we will talk about today with Steve. So hey, Steve.
Hi. Very good. Thanks. And thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Before we begin to deconstruct what is liberated leadership, I'm really curious about that one. Very catchy name. I'd like to just start quick intro as well as, how did you get into games and what are the disciplines you have covered, maybe the highlights of the games you've worked on, and that led to your realization of writing about liberated leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, it's been 30 years in the industry, which sometimes just makes me pause for thought. But if I go right back, actually, to when I was at university, I always followed my passion and what I was curious about. And I ended up studying in my first year psychology, sports science, drama, and computer science. And I could have taken any two of those forwards into my degree. And I ended up focusing on computer science and drama because I've always had this sort of science on the one hand, arts and creativity on the other hand, maybe two sides of my brain being fully stimulated. But I didn't really know what that was for. So when I graduated, computer science was where I could make the money. So I started on the computer science as a software engineer. And then after 1 year, I thought I want to do something creative with my skills as well as be a scientist. And so I applied to work for a games company, and that company was Intelligent Games in London. And I went into leadership roles almost straight away. I became a team leader of the very first game I did, which was PGA European Tour for PC. And it was Electronic Arts game, actually. They were the publisher of it. And then I just carried on in leadership roles all the way through that. I did another golf game for Sony, and that was like a melting pot for my career, because on that, without really thinking about it, at probably 25, when I was already a director of the company at that point, I was the lead programmer, I was the game designer, I managed everyone on the team, I was doing the business negotiation with Sony. I just, completely untenable to have all of these roles. But at the time, it just seemed to make perfect sense, because when you're young and I guess a little bit foolish, it just seems like, why wouldn't I just take all of this on? But yeah, that game made me kind of ill and wasn't good for my marriage either. But I had 7 years at Intelligent Games, working with an industry then from 95 through to 2001, 2002, where it was very loose in terms of the relationships between developers and publishers, and people coming and going very rapidly. And I think it's still volatile now, but it was very unstable then. We ran that company for 7 years, and we had a lot of success. We made games like Emperor Battle of June with Westward, and Simile with Maxis. And ultimately, we signed a deal with a publisher that went bankrupt, and that took us down. We couldn't continue trading. And that was when I moved to work for Electronic Arts, and had 20 years with Electronic Arts, including 18 with Criterion.
It's quite a long time in the same company, and even like whether it's EA or Criterion. What were really the things that started like to emerge for you that you need to do something about it? What were the experience or like the key moments where you say, okay, I will do my own thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a real pivot for me in 2012. And in the run up to that, there's a whole sequence of games of which I'm massively proud to have been a part and to have contributed to. There's, the ones, Intelligent Games that I just mentioned, as well as the ones with Westward. I worked on FIFA World Cup for the Japan World Cup and on the Tiger Woods series back then. And then when I joined EA, I started with Harry Potter. And then when I came down to Burnout, we were working on Burnout Revenge, and then Burnout Paradise. And on my first Need for Speed was Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. I was really proud of that. And in 2012, Need for Speed Most Wanted. And it was during that game that I hit a pivot point where I knew I had to change. And I guess what happened is I had more than 15 years, I've been leading video game teams by that point, non-stop, game scaling, budget scaling. And for me, it became clear that I'd led myself into trouble. The way I was approaching things led me to Burnout, which is kind of ironic in that I've just been working on a game series called Burnout, but I did Burnout and I just had to stop. One day I just broke. I think we just come back from Gamescom actually to promote Need for Speed Most Wanted. And I just broke down. And while it was diagnosed as stress-induced depression, nervous exhaustion, I'd just driven myself to the absolute breaking point. And I had to have 3 months off of work at that point to just completely rest and reset. And it was coming back from that 3 months, which actually I missed the very finaling of Most Wanted, and I came back and the game was launched. And it was a great video game, actually. And it was a game to be proud of, but I wanted to still make games that I could be proud of my contribution to those games. But I knew I had to fundamentally reset how I led, because I saw a really wonderful consultant psychiatrist called Dr. Tim Cantifer, who, if anybody wants to read about it, Dr. Cantifer's written an excellent book called The Curse of the Strong, if you want to read about the condition. So I felt really fortunate to see him. But he said to me, look, people who have this kind of illness, they typically relapse, and the number of future episodes is 4. And the reason for that is that people get well through rest or medication or both. They put themselves back in the same situation. So unsurprisingly, if you repeat an experiment with the same parameters, you get the same result. And I was determined to break that cycle for myself. I always look back on it, it was a little bit dangerous because that was a little bit of my achiever model coming back in again that had got me into trouble. I was like, oh, I'm going to be brilliant at recovery because I'm going to achieve that, like I achieved everything else in my career to that point. But I was really determined I have to lead in a different way. So I started to write really to hold myself accountable to the things I was doing differently so that I could check that I wasn't driving myself back into that same place that had made me ill. And after a while from those notes, I kind of wanted to make almost a public commitment to the new way of leadership. So I spoke at GDC in 2019, did a talk called Zen and the Art of Leadership, where I talked about my journey and a little bit about Criterion's journey as well. And from there, I realized that the model was starting to connect with people, that there were other people who my experience resonated with them, and the change in leadership style would be as potentially as powerful to them as it had been for me. And so that's when I started thinking I want to publish what I've discovered, and ultimately it's led to forming Game Plan now as well.
Awesome. And thanks a lot for sharing probably a very painful time of your life as that pivot. But having talked to quite a bunch of executives in games, and especially through the lens of leadership, it's unfortunately not an uncommon story. Sometimes before we get to the point of realization that something is not working right, you have to reach sometimes the bottom. I had an episode with Joachim Akren as well, who was a co-founder of Next Games, and reached kind of the same similar story before he went on his own. And yeah, it's kind of typical. And I hope by having more of the story testimonials that we don't have to reach that point to change. But I understand human motivation is everything is working while changing, right? But there are signs as well that we can read. Probably we can feel that something is not all right, like personally in who we are, because it's also behind burnout. There are many causes, right? It's depression. It can be emotional, physical. It's very personal. So I'm not going to say that there's only one cause, but what is definitely contributing among the factors is really the dissonance between who you are, who you want to be, and when you are in an environment where you're forced to not be who you are. So it's a lot of layers where at some point it's exhausting, and it puts a weight on top of the other things that are, of course, personal challenges.
Absolutely. The phrase that sums it up for me, and again, it's in Dr. Cantifer's book, and he says the smaller the gap between your true self and the self you present in the world, the healthier and happier you'll be. So for me, that was a case for authenticity, which is right at the heart of the liberated leadership model. How can I show up professionally in an authentic way, and what does that really mean? And that was really part of the exploration for me.
The gap between yourself and how you appear, this is the, I would say, infinite challenge as being in a position of leadership, because there are expected outcomes of you. You work also in a specific context, culture, so a certain way of behaving to embrace the culture you're part of. But at the same time, we are all humans and we want to be seen and recognized for who we are. So I think this is where the point of tension exists. And I can recognize this as a key challenge where anyone taking the position of responsibility leadership, I think, overlook that part. It's not like you're selling your soul. It's a bit exaggerated, but you have to find your way of being while meeting the responsibilities. With that, I want to get straight into the book, actually, which probably will cover more concrete cases of your own experience. Starting maybe with a basic question for me. How did you come up with the name Liberated Leadership, which is, I believe, a process of 10 years of thinking of a book?
Yes.
And you talked about pillars as well in your book. So if we could cover quickly an overview of what it is about and where the name is coming from, and we'll follow up with questions.
Absolutely. So the liberation, actually, the previous conversation about authenticity is at the heart of it. How can you lead from a point of taking off the mask, showing up every day with a mask on to play the role of leader, because it's a role that is required of you or a part that is paid of you? How can you show up with your whole self, but like you say, deliver fully on your responsibilities because the reason I chose Liberated is to be liberated from the energy requirements of wearing a mask. If you have to play a part, it takes so much energy to be someone you're not and to live by any values that are out of whack with your own personal values. The energy required for that is such a overhead on what you can bring to any endeavor you're trying to lead that it leaves so little less for the joyous work of, in my case, collaborating with wonderfully talented game developers and making something that players can love and enjoy. So it's the liberation of that and why I put personal authenticity at the heart of the liberated leadership model. But it's quite a complicated one for that, because when we say authenticity, it doesn't mean that I just show up with a completely unfiltered version of myself. And anyway, and that's, authenticity is my excuse, if you like, for being completely unfiltered and just saying whatever's on my mind. It's not that. For me, it's showing up open-hearted, open-minded, with your whole self, and no faking, no adding things to my personal experience that don't exist, or trying to draw from things which I haven't fully assimilated into my experience, and asking when I don't know. And it's actually a really wonderful TED Talk. I don't know if you've ever watched it, by, I think it's Professor Hermione Abera, called The Authenticity Paradox. The point she makes, which I think is a brilliant one, is if we're committed to growth, which I do think we all should be, and for me, it's the thing that continues to motivate me at this point in my career, then the self is changing. So if you're saying being true to yourself, which self is it that you're being true to? The one of right today, the person you're trying to grow into? And so for me, it's okay to edit. It's necessary to edit. But the whole, if you like, the whole range from you're editing from, has to be authentic, and a commitment to widening that range of experience and talents and knowledge is essential to authenticity. So that's right at the heart of liberated leadership, and that's pillar number one, if you like, is that personal authenticity. So, and then if I talk through a very sort of quick overview of how the other 6 pillars are different to what I was doing before. Fundamentally, what I was doing before was trying to be in a position of control. So as a production leader, facilitate the control of a wide group of talented people from the thinking and the priorities and the planning of a small number of people. And I put myself right at the bottleneck of that transfer of control. And it's really not tenable. It doesn't scale. And actually, I've come to believe very strongly it's not the best way to engage and motivated and get the most out of the talent that everybody brings to an endeavor. So it's replacing all the elements of a small group of people planning, and then a set of, one or more leaders trying to control execution, with maximizing the engagement and motivation of everyone contributing to the project, and really accessing the wisdom of the team, and then filtering and leading and prioritizing that. So, very high level, the model then is focusing on now, inspiring belief, widely, might be good actually, inspiring trust widely, setting ambition in the mastery zone, providing timely feedback, and greeting discovery with an aha and not an oh no. And then back to focusing on now. And each of those pillars have a supporting practice that I've worked on.
Okay. Really looking forward to having your book available to read those more in detail. And I'm sure you did spend the time in crystallizing those to get the essence of what you're covering for each part. I mean, that's what the book is for. So probably not on the 7 ones. I wanted to focus on the first point of focusing on the now, because it implies that you are clear about your priority, what's important. And unfortunately, the reality, I'm thinking like any management role where you have to report to the top. So there are things to deliver. There's the demand of the team, demand of personal life. what are the tools that allow you to focus more on the now?
Yes, focusing on what you need to do right now is the question. So that's not an argument for not planning at all. In fact, I would say it's maybe an argument for planning more, because whether your methodology is agile or something else, it's really an argument for replanning constantly, reassessing priority in the context of a route towards your goal, a roadmap, and probably some detailed planning for the next week or two. So to me, to cultivate presence means fully immersing oneself in the current moment and trying to experience the joy and lightness, the ease that is in that moment, and fully access that. And, and the fuel that gives us in developing video games, the joy of when we achieve something, the fun that we're trying to do, the experience we're trying to give the player. So to do that, I do think as leaders, we need to be deliberate about setting aside time for reflection and deliberately cultivating presence. It's so easy, like you said in your question, to get completely caught up in first meetings at 8 a.m., my last meeting's at 6:30, and I have about 30 seconds breaks in between all of those things, and I eat while I'm on a call at one where I've got a camera off call. I'll eat then. That's so easy to be drawn into that without doing it deliberately. It's not do nothing, but it'll feel like do nothing as a leader. And the do nothing part is to reflect on what you've heard in previous meetings, to process it, to be clear about your own point of view before moving on, to action or communication. And for me, the most important tool in cultivating that was regular mindfulness practice. I found it to be super powerful for me for recognizing that I needed to stop and reflect and reprioritize. But I also found that it was beyond personal and into project management, because, like I said, we should always have a plan. We should always have a roadmap to the future, and we should be planning all the time, actually, and replanning. But one thing I found in video games for myself, and I found it resonated with many on the team, the scope of what we need to achieve at the end can be overwhelming. The grand vision, everything we need to do. And so it's really important to bring ourselves back to what we do now, because the simple plan is do the next most important thing right, repeat. And it might sound banal, but that's the simple way that you get to the big goal, by just keep doing that in the light of a roadmap which you're sharing with each other and changing. So from that space, at the personal and at the project level, I found presence super important. And I also found that as a leader, being present benefits the overall team, because it helps create a calm space for effective and collaborative decision making. If as a leader you can't show up present to the people you're trying to collaborate with and ultimately make a decision either for as a service or on behalf of, it's very hard to create the calmness we need to bring all the points of view that are needed forward to make the most effective decision we can. And you fall back into what I call doing leadership to people rather than leading them as a service, which is the flip from my old way to my new way.
I'd like to go a bit deeper in like a practice of mindfulness, setting time for yourself, having distance to see the big picture. And because you have that distance, you have that calmness when you bring where everything like is like, oh my God, we're all going to fail, we are late, panic. And then you can actually bring this stillness and say like, it's all right. We need to focus on that. And this is maybe also a related question to your own path, why you decided to go on your own and independently. What kind of environment does it need so you can be that kind of leader? Because I really believe in system and culture. And I'm going to give an example.
Yes.
Where despite all the best intention, you want to set a time for yourself. But then you have your boss imagining a place, right? Tells you like, why are you not working? Why are you not in meetings? Are you slacking? Or what are you doing with that time where you're not producing something?
Yes.
Like you have just meetings. I have been in that situation all day. because you are part of middle management meeting, and then you end up exactly in the situation where you have 30 minutes for breaks and you can't say no. Or if you say no, you may lose your position or you may lose credibility in what you're doing because everyone else is doing it. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I share, as you know, I share your interest in systems. And I suppose in some ways at Criterion, I was very fortunate in that when we formed the studio leadership team, just start 2013 actually, we were united in the desire to do things differently and better. So the commitment to find a better way amongst that leadership team, this is when Matt became GM of Criterion, in creating our system, there was support from my fellow leaders and we were very much on that journey together. But we were within a bigger system of electronic arts as well, which is, you know, thousands of people across many studios and, of course, all the hierarchy needed to run a company of that size. And I suppose in some ways we're fortunate again in that, you know, we had the trust of the senior leaders at the time, and maybe our previous success had earned us that right. But I know not everybody has that situation where they are supported. But I would say the alternative is not tenable. So when you feel I have to, I should, for me, the word should is always a trigger to investigate a little more. And could I change it to could? Could I replace my should with a could? So I should attend this meeting during my lunch hour and not reflect. I could attend this meeting during my lunch hour and not reflect. And sometimes I'm sure you'll decide on the balance of things that you're going to make the decision to go and not do the reflection this time. But if you keep doing that over and over again for long enough, you will end up in a place of, if not burnout and exhaustion, a place where you certainly can't bring your best stuff. And the company is paying you to bring your best stuff. So you're not actually acting in contrary to the agreement you have with your employer to do that. And I think it's worth the energy of explaining that's your approach and how you believe you show up best as a leader. I think your results as a leader will back that up, that by taking that approach, you're more effective than not. And if ultimately that's still not acceptable in that organization, no, I want you to never take time. Effectively, the measure, either directly or implicitly, is I want you to never take time to reflect. I want you to do for 8 hours a day, by which I really mean 10 hours a day. Then I think it's worth asking yourself if that's an organization you want to be a part of. Because for me, I know what the consequences will be.
Yes. I think here a practical takeaway, like trying to start to take care of yourself, because having the big picture, having distance where you're at, even emotionally, is so fundamental for the nature of work we're doing, like leading a group. And by setting boundaries of, no, I will not take a meeting during lunchtime, or I have my focus time. And if it's not supported by the organization, where you test basically the limits and the boundaries, and if a way out is not working together, then maybe this is the way out, because I think you should never compromise and back to your true self on the things that are really important for you to do your best work. So that's also another takeaway. It will not always work in all the organization. You can try. And you see the organization, because you do have an influence in a position of leadership, to change things. But there's a limit of how much you can change things. And when you've reached that limit that may not work for you, it's also okay to see a way out and working in other environments that will be more supportive or align with how you want to grow, right? I think it's a fair thing where we tell ourselves we have to, we should, I have to stay, I have to be this. No, you don't.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I think it's, especially when you get into, you know, more senior leadership roles, advance in your career, I think it is true that people value much more for who you are than what you do.
Yes.
And that's why they've put you in that position. So working on yourself is working on the project, on the product, on the service, whatever it is, because how you show up makes so much difference. Our eyes are on you in a very real way as a leader. your very presence makes a difference to how that unfolds in a very real way. You're setting the norms and the standards, which is the other thing of why the boundaries are so important. Because by demonstrating that those boundaries are matter that, that you care about yourself, you're demonstrating that that's important to those they lead and that they should deliver, yes, and deliver their best possible work, but also take care of themselves, and that those two things can live together in a committed and passionate individual.
Yeah, and that led for me to thinking of really when we think about culture of an organization, we talk about like position of management that could be middle management or, head of, but ultimately it is also responsibility of a company in the position of a CEO or the founder to also have that mindset. For the last part of our conversation today, I wanted to spend some time on what led you to really the decision to go independent with what you've started, and who do you think need the most help with what you've observed and that you can really help immediately today for the ones who are resonating with what you're sharing, right? Because like I said, there are challenges of the system, but where can you help? Who can you help? And maybe people can find you after this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it was a massive decision to leave Electronic Arts, and then it was a really big decision to go independent and start the consultancy. And I guess as I started to talk to people, do more and more of the public speaking, I found that a lot of these issues were resonating with so many different people in so many different contexts. So working with people in studio leadership roles, I think really important process that you get those three things aligned, culture, process and budgeting, can be a really powerful way of working with people leading development studios. But the other thing I'm finding is to work on the other side of that relationship is really important with the people who are funding video games fundamentally. So financial organizations and or publishers, because that side of the relationship needs some growth as well. We know that video games so often miss on at least one of the magic triangle of time, quality and scope, but we're not necessarily bringing those conversations out into a very authentic space where people can, express their concerns, talk about risk in a very real way, not in a pretend way.
It's kind of funny that we find each other in our path of growing more. For me, on my side, it's like conscious leadership, but it's kind of a different name, but, similar principles behind.
Yeah.
Better practices of leadership in gaming in general. And on the thoughts of also having that conversation on the investor side or like where the money is, because what I found most of the time getting in the way to do the right thing for companies and even like leadership, like taking your time, thinking long term, it's the pressure of money.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And so either you have to have a very strong discipline, be okay with yourself, you lose your job, lose sometimes reputation to do the right thing. But it would be much easier as well if it was be supported on the money side, if it's even possible to have more awareness of what it takes to create a sustainable, growing, good business and having more awareness on the side of publisher and investor. I will stay optimistic there. At the end of the day, we live in a capitalistic world with economic constraints. But I do believe, and I will also try to follow the movement with you on trying to, at least create more awareness on that side of the conversation.
Yes.
Are there any other things at last that you would like to share or cover? Where you're going next? Another pillar that you felt that was worth mentioning today?
Absolutely. I think it's great to connect with people like you who are thinking about this and trying to build that community wider. I'm really interested in hearing from other people who want to be involved in the conversation about how we lead and how we move that forward. I have my own podcast called the Liberated Leadership interview series where I'm interviewing people across multiple different industries and leadership roles, trying to find how much the model resonates with them. So it'd be great if people could check out that and perhaps we can share a link. And of course, if people, want to collaborate and work together, that's something I'm actively looking to do right now. So yeah, one thing I would just add on the last thing you said is one of my favorite quotes, and all the people at Criterion would smile because they know how much I would love to bring a quote into all the things I was doing. But Gerald Weinberg wrote The Psychology of Computer Programming. And I like that this quote came from him because he's a sciencey scientist. But he said, no matter what they tell you, it's a people problem. And it's well worth remembering that, I think. So, it's a money problem. Yes, it is, but underneath it is a people problem. It's all about the relationships between the people providing the money and the people spending the money ultimately. And ultimately, you have the same goal, which is for the video game to be successful. So I don't underestimate the bravery it takes to show up authentically and have an authentic conversation when you do have very real things to lose, as you point out.
Yes.
But I do think the path to liberation is to be brave and to show up authentically and have the real conversation. Yeah, be the change you want to see in the world. It remains true.
Exactly. Really looking forward to your book. You can count on me that I will be reading it, giving feedback and spreading around as well, because what I want to see is just overall better practices of leadership and ultimately just happier people. That's what it is about for me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the conversation.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am trying to grow a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. So, if you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. Also, please don't forget to follow the show so you don't miss out on future content. Every episode is packed with actionable insights that will help you improve your leadership skills now. And if you are interested in learning more on the topics that we discussed today, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, and there you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership. So, have a great week, and until the next time,